Chapter 2549. The scout was too far away and did not hear what Yun Jian said clearly. However, he saw with his own eyes how Yun Jian fired her sniper rifle and blew up the heads of 30,000 enemy soldiers. Captain, please wait a minute. If we go out now, what will happen to these 10,000 refugees? Every corner is guarded by the N Nation people. If we bring people out, what if the N Nation people take the opportunity to attack? Seeing that the captain was about to leave, the scout pulled him back and said with a bitter face. His words made the captain stop in his tracks. Yes, he could not joke around with the lives of these 10,000 refugees. Behind him were more than 10,000 refugees who needed to be protected. With a bang, the captain punched the wall and lowered his head in pain. Do I have to watch my fellow countrymen who came to rescue us be humiliated to death again? You saw how Comrade Lu Xiaohong died back then. Those bastards, they actually, the team leader couldn't bring himself to say the rest of the words. The special forces also knew how to feel heartache. They were people of flesh and blood. They were not emotionless machines. And Captain Lu and the rest. At this point, the captain had already grabbed his head and slowly squatted on the ground. When the others heard the captain's words, they did not say anything else. For the past few days, their people had been guarding nearby. Once the N Nation people made a move, they would defend and prevent them from entering the temporary safe zone. However, there was no source of food. Therefore, the captain had to send people to secretly transport the food in. Comrade Lu Xiaohong, Captain Lu and the rest were caught by the N Nation people when they were secretly transporting food. Captain Lu and the rest were beheaded on the spot. Only their heads were hung high on the N Nation flag. As a female comrade, Lu Xiaohong was gang-raped to death by thousands of N Nation men. It was a great humiliation. As for Yu Xiaoluo, he was caught and beheaded when he was secretly transporting food with Captain Lu and the rest. That was all the news that the captain had heard. Captain, we will leave some people here to defend. Team 1 will go out to rescue them. How about that? Seeing the captain's pained expression, the special forces beside him did not feel good either. At this moment, a special forces soldier suggested. Okay. The team leader grabbed the rifle and stood up. Just as the team leader was about to lead them out, one of the refugees who had heard the news, an elderly woman walked over to stop him. Captain Fan, you can't just leave us here. Captain is only saving people. He won't abandon you. The special forces soldier who was standing beside Captain Fan just now replied. But what if the people from N Nation rush in again? The old woman led a group of people and refused to give way. Captain Fan, I beg you, don't go. S son was Mad Dragon's nemesis from many years ago. Cut the crap, give it to me or not. Mad Dragon clenched his fist and shouted. That will depend on. The scientist stood up and walked up to the Mad Dragon. The next second, the scientist raised his leg and kicked Mad Dragon to the ground in slow motion, and stepped on Mad Dragon's abdomen with one foot, slowly lowered his head, and continued with a gloomy tone, your sincerity. This man's strength was naturally far below Mad Dragon, but the moment he raised his leg, Mad Dragon clenched his fist and took the kick. Just after the scientist stepped on Mad Dragon to the ground, he suddenly slowly raised his leg again, and stepped on Mad Dragon's head and laughed sinisterly, ha ha. I didn't expect you, Mad Dragon, to be in such a state for a woman. Ah. Top reading website, M. Chapter 2551. Please wait for a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Yun Jian saw that the little girl and the little fellow were being watched. She turned around and went back to the house intending to take a bath. Ce was supposed to arrive in the wee hours of the morning. After returning to the rented seaside villa, Yun Jian reaches out to turn on the light in the living room. Suddenly, a slender large palm pressed down on her small hand. Another large palm came from behind Yun Jian and covered Yun Jian's mouth. The person who appeared out of nowhere pulled Yun Jian to the living room table and pushed Yun Jian onto the table that could be entered at any time. The person covered Yun Jian's mouth and pressed down on Yun Jian with a force that even Yun Jian could not resist, before leaning into her ear. The moment the familiar voice rang, Yun Jian felt her legs in a miniskirt being pressed down by the familiar figure in the dark villa living room and slowly parted. Xiao Jian. Chapter 2556. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, page 1/1. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation CE suddenly appeared and pinned Yun Jian on the big table in the middle of the living room of the seaside villa. A child's voice came from outside the house, which sounded like the sound of a drum in Yun Jian's ears. Mama papa, brother mama papa. Ayaya. The childish voice of a child rang out. After all, she was the one who gave birth to the child. Needless to say, Yun Jian could tell that the childish voice with poor pronunciation came from the little girl's mouth. You said that your parents are in the house? Doesn't your father only arrive here in the wee hours of the morning? Following the little girl's babbling voice, a voice that was just as immature, the two shadows that resembled humans turned out to be an illusion. It was Zhou Yiran who left the crowd with the little girl and ran out. Zhou Yiran put down the curtains and carried the little girl out. Mama papa. The barbecue should be done. The little girl was easily carried by Zhou Yiran and held by Zhou Yiran's little fingers. Her other hand, which was so small that it was only half the size of Zhou Yiran's, and called out pointed at the door and pouted. The 4-year-old Zhou Yiran reached out and rubbed the little girl's head. All right, I'll take you to see them. His face was clearly young, seeing that the little girl was still holding the flowers he gave her. Wifey Zhou Yiran was helpless. It was as mysterious as a mystery. Small body and when the little girl heard Zhou Yiran's other words, she was originally noisy, had just opened the door of the villa with the little girl in his arms when he saw the center of the big living room brought the little girl and left this place. The moment he opened the door and turned on the light switch, the two children hugging Yun Jian and hiding outside on the long dining window in the middle of the living room was in a mess. As if it had just been pursed her red lips and there was a floor-to-ceiling window in the distance on the beach from which one could see the bound mutton skewer and was someone had used a remote control to draw the text message from CE. Mama. There was only one simple and crude sentence in the text message. The little girl after attending the engagement party, Zhou Yiran himself was still young. Scrammed to the Amazon. He was only 4 years old. You're not allowed to come back before the new year. Her hands, her body's website. He almost couldn't hold the little girl steady, but in the end, he still comforted the little girl. There seems to be someone behind the curtains. Let's go over and take a look. Zhou Yiran comforted the little girl and carried her over. It had to be said that Zhou Yiran's perception was very sensitive. He carried the little girl and walked step by step towards the curtains in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Walking to the curtains of the floor-to-ceiling windows, he reached out with his free hand and pulled the curtains open. At this moment, two shadows flashed past the floor-to-ceiling window in front of them. Creak, creak. Outside the window, two coconut trees were swaying in the wind. Chapter 2557. When Adam saw this message, he spat out the mutton skewer in his mouth onto the ground. He wiped his mouth and eyes and looked at the message from the young master. 3 seconds later, Adam cried out innocently, "What's wrong with me now? Zhou Yiran. Come out, you stinking brat. Look at what you've done this time." He just carried Yuan out to play, Lan Su suddenly said as she took a bite of the barbecued sausage and crossed her slender legs. Once Adam heard that his idiotic son had gone out to play with CE's darling again, it was obvious that something serious must have happened. Adam slapped his hand on his head, looking helpless for the first time. Dang, your son is just like you, peeing on Tiger's head every day. Shuaying suddenly hooked his arm around Adam's shoulder and affectionately called him by his new nickname. Shuaying's new nickname for Adam was Dang, in return for the nickname Wang Air that Adam used to call him. Scram. Brother Wang Air. Adam slapped Shuaying's hand away from his shoulder and said angrily. However, everyone knew that Adam's fierce tone was purely a joke with Shuaying. Ha. When Shuaying heard Adam's words, a joyful smile appeared on his handsome face. However, the deep scar on his
Sending
neck
me
looked
to
a
the
little
Amazon
sinister,
or
something like that, or
In the end, Yun
Adam
Jian
walked
took a
over
quick
and laughed
shower
out
and
came
came
out of the room with
However,
CE. Just as Adam
Papa,
said this, he
when
was
she saw
frightened by
CE,
the little girl
sidelined
rushed over.
glance.
Zhou Yiran couldn't hold the little girl in the end. Young master, he was afraid that she would teach this rascal a lesson when we get the little girl down on a clean beach. Adam walked over and grabbed Zhou Yiran. As soon as the little girl landed, then he crawled over to see like a little loach. Only then did see normal children usually started learning to walk at the age of 1. As soon as he turned around, the little girl used her were only 6 powerless hand to hold onto Si's head. Didn't let them learn to walk early. Then she used her other hand to hold onto Yun Jian's head. However, the little girl could already stand up by holding onto the stairs and railings. Mama. The little girl could also stand up by holding onto objects if someone helped her. However, she still crawled normally. Furthermore, the speed at which it crawled was extremely fast. Si bent down and picked up the little girl before Yun Jian could. Mama? The little girl looked up at Yun Jian in Si's arms. When Yun Jian heard this, she pursed her red lips and walked over. The little girl held Yun Jian's hand and bent down to hold Si's hand, and then placed Yun Jian's hand in Si's large hand. Hee hee. When the little girl saw this scene, she happily clapped her hands and shouted. Of course, the little girl couldn't hold Yun Jian's and Si's hands by herself. Of course, Yun Jian and Si doted on the little girl and would naturally do as the little girl asked. This little girl has turned into a spirit. Ah. Speaking of which, young master, please forgive me. Chapter 2558. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Qin Yiru's mother called her old friend, page 1/1. The little girl used all her strength to knock Si's head against Yun Jian's head. Yun Jian's face was flushed red. Qin Yiru, Gu Junjian, Shuang, Lin Wei, Mo Sen, Luo Mei, Lan Su and everyone else were standing around them. Moreover, the people around them were all looking at them. When Qin Yiru saw this scene, she suddenly remembered that not long ago, the little girl had held a photo of the family of 4 with Yun Jian, Si, and the little girl. In the photo, Yun Jian and Si were folded so that they were kissing. She was really a mischievous child. It was Mo Bufan. She knew everything. And the others from the martial arts society. Who was the one who taught him Xinjiang Town's Lu Seeing this scene, even Qin Yiru was a little shy. The remaining 6 members of Team Monarch, hands and coaxed the little girl in a coaxing voice, and Captain Yuan Cheng were all Granny will carry you. As for the Kosha mercenaries, all they were not here to ride the waves. The Kosha mercenaries had the ability to find their way here. No. Those who were close to Yun Jian usually took the bus that Yun Jian invited and were brought here directly. I want a kiss. Isn't here? The little girl spoke in a voice that was not very after scanning the area as if she understood Qin Yiru's words. Back in high school, she shook her head violently as if she was going to cry if she did not listen to her. The little girl's request was really too embarrassing. Yun Jian really come tomorrow morning to move or not to move. Just when everyone thought that did not have any other suspicion, the little girl's request and throw the crying little girl into the luxurious holiday villa that could accommodate a few hundred people. Si carried the little girl with one hand and pressed the back of Yun Jian's head with the other hand in front of everyone. Zhang Meihua he bent down and kissed her seductive little mouth. Just as they got out of the car, this scene happened very suddenly. Qin Yiru aside and told Qin Yiru, when they came to their senses, they all screamed, "You have to cooperate and not embarrass Mom in front of everyone." He actually kissed her in front of everyone. Translator, Young Master, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Young Master, Endless Fantasy Translation. Adam led the crowd. Just as he shouted this, Lan Su hit him on the head. Go home and kneel on the washboard if you want to create more atmosphere. This was indeed effective as Adam quickly shut his mouth. After being kissed by Si Yun Jian, the next minute felt like a century. Her face was flushed red and her cheeks were a little soft. Until Si released hers on her lips were her translation. Her until her was her translation, her until her was translation. At 11 at translation at around 11 at translation 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 at on, ish translation translation in buses at. Chapter 2559. Today not only were Zhang Meihua's relatives present, she had also invited some of her younger and older friends. When one reached middle age or old age, they loved to brag about how rich their juniors were, where they had bought a few houses, how many betrothal gifts they had received from the groom when their daughter was married off, how grand the engagement party and wedding were, how rich the groom was, and how well their granddaughter had married. This was probably what Zhang Meihua's generation loved to brag about the most. When they were young, everyone loved to brag about the things of the younger generation. When they were old, there were also things that the elderly would brag about themselves. This was a path that everyone had to go through in life. Zhang Meihua had invited some of her close friends who she used to hang out with. She had wanted to show off how great her granddaughter was in front of them, so she had brought them along. Yun Jian and Zhang Meihua had always been on bad terms. Of course, it was Qin Yiru who had arranged for Zhang Meihua to be present. Yun Jian would not force Qin Yiru to do anything, nor would she bother with Zhang Meihua. Qin Yiru could only nod helplessly at her mother's request. Everyone entered the house. Everyone gathered in the living room of this super luxurious seaside villa. Qin Yiru had prepared tea leaves to brew tea for the guests. Sooner or later, they'll have to break up. Zhang Meihua had brought along with a height of praising Qin Yiru for giving birth to a good daughter. Wang Shu and As the group of old women asked, they asked about the same age as Zhang Meihua. Qin Yiru did not know nor had Zhang Meihua bragging about how great Yin Jian was in front of her. Oh my, now that she had picked a bone. Yiru, haven't you seen how the other party's family and Yun Jian was marrying into an old woman who was about she exaggerated. 79 to put it bluntly, she was mocking CE for being poor and fat because of her height. Yun Jian was amazing, but marrying a man who might not even be able to fork out the wedding money was enough to make her a laughing stock. Had all heard Zhang Meihua's exaggerated boasting. Naturally, they were extremely envious, thinking about exaggerating the matter when she went back. Other than congratulating them verbally, less than half a minute after Wang Shu and Fang said those words, upset and wanted to pick on them when they spoke. Male voice suddenly sounded out. Shook her head when she heard the old woman's words. He directly replied to Wang Shu and Fang. What about the betrothal gifts? Pass down the order. They're already engaged. After the engagement, when they get married, how much will the betrothal gifts be? All restaurants in country Z will operate for 3 days free of charge to celebrate Mai and Shaojian's engagement. After hearing Qin Yiru's words, all expenses will be charged to my account. After that, the old woman paused. Without waiting for Qin Yiru's reply, she continued, Yiru, your daughter is the director of new crews. She's filthy rich. Without a betrothal gift worth tens of millions, I'd like to see who can marry your daughter. In this day and age, it's not enough just to be good looking. In the future, the woman will earn money while the man relies on his looks. Chapter 2560. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. All his money to her, page 1/1. The magnetic male voice rang out suddenly. Other than Wang Xuanfang, the other old ladies sitting in the living room of the luxurious holiday villa were chatting with each other in delight before a sumptuous feast. Not all the old ladies from Xinjiang town were chatting with Qin Yiru. It had been a long time since they had gathered together. In accordance with the nature of old women who loved to gossip, they were sitting around, drinking tea and talking boastfully. Of course, it was only a few days after the end of the year. The old ladies were bragging about their son and daughter's last year's income, as well as their grandson and granddaughter's academic results and results in their final exams. Wang Xuanfang had thought that no one was listening to her, so she spoke to Qin Yiru in a tone that she thought was considerate of Yun Jian, who knew that right after Wang Xuanfang's last sentence about Yun Jian and Siyi's falling apart sooner or later, Siyi's reply was like a slap to Wang Xuanfang's face. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was completely stunned. Yes, young master. It was only when Adam put away his frivolous smile and nodded at Ce as he walked out of the luxurious holiday villa to arrange the matter that everyone snapped back to reality. Oh, all the restaurants in the country will be open for free for 3 days. How much will this cost? Wang Xuanfang was stupefied. Her rosy cheeks were now glowing white as she listened to Ce's words. Wang Xuanfang didn't know how to react for a while. Sitting next to Zhang Meihua was a short old woman with yellowish skin and obvious wrinkles on her face that had been crushed by the passage of time. She was a little tanned. She was a shrewd and frightened old woman. All the restaurants in the country will be open for free for 3 days. Let's not talk about the whole country. Even in Longmen City, it'll cost at least tens of millions to open for free for 3 days. In Jia province, it'll cost at least hundreds of millions. It might even cost billions. If it's the whole country, then... The short old lady's name was Rong Jiaoxian. She was almost 60 years old and was considered ugly among the group of old ladies. Rong Jiaoxian was a primary school teacher when she was young. She had a pension after retirement, so she was considered more authoritative among the group of old ladies and had led a decent life. She was considered a cultured person at best, but teachers who were usually fierce to their students when they were young were full of wrinkles when they were old. Rong Jiaoxian was one such example. What? Billions? When Wang Xuanfang heard the number of billions, she had already stood up with a swoosh. Her eyeballs were about to pop out of their sockets, and her face was green and purple. Is Jia province? Rong Jiaoxian said, is Jia province? The 2004 population in 2004 was? Even was translation is was translation was translation? This was. I didn't know your son-in-law was so rich. But even if he's rich, he shouldn't be spending it like this. Ask him to take back his plan. No matter how rich he is, he'll go bankrupt if he spends it like this. Moreover, it's just an engagement. Can your daughter withstand such a grand occasion? Wang Xuanfang spoke to Qin Yiru after she recovered from her shock. She was trying to get Qin Yiru to talk Ce out of it. Wang Xuanfang had thought that Ce was not good enough for Yun Jian earlier, but now, she felt that Yun Jian was not worthy of Ce marrying her with such a grand display. Moreover, Ce would probably go bankrupt if he did this. He might as well give them more in return if he had so much money. However, Wang Xuanfang did not have the time to finish her sentence. Just as Wang Xuanfang said that, Shuiying slammed his phone on the table without waiting for Ce to step in. He glanced at Wang Xuanfang from the corner of his eye and repeated what Ce had told him earlier. All restaurants in Country Z will be open for free for 3 days. You'll only need to spend 10 days of my young master's income. Young master's betrothal gift to young madam is that all the money and assets in young master's account will be given to young madam. Not a single cent will be left. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy. Chapter 2561. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. He would give her all of his money. Betrothal gifts were usually given by the groom to the bride. Usually, if the bride was having a hard time, she would keep some of it. Otherwise, she would return it all to the groom. To put it bluntly, it was Siyi's betrothal gift. It was all his savings over the years, including real estate and his company. The betrothal gifts were given by the groom to the bride. Of course, they would not all fall into Qin Yiru's hands but into Yun Jian's. If Yun Jian's family, Qin Yiru's family, was having a hard time, Qin Yiru's family would keep some of Siyi's betrothal gifts. If Qin Yiru's family was having a good time, Siyi's betrothal gifts would be returned in full. The more betrothal gifts the groom gave, the more glamorous the bride's wedding would be. In a village, if the groom gave a betrothal gift of up to 1,000,000 yuan as a formality, he would be considered a very wealthy family. Shuang confessed on behalf of Siyi. He would invite all the restaurants in the country to operate for 3 days for free, and it would only cost him 10 days of income. All of Siyi's money would be given to Yun Jian in the form of betrothal gifts. He would not hold anything back. This process would be completed during the engagement banquet and the wedding. What? Hearing Shui Ying's words, Wang Xuanfang, whose butt was still firmly pressed against the bench, slipped and fell to the ground. Before she could get up, she exclaimed loudly with her eyes bulging. He would rather turn from the richest man in the world to a poor man with nothing in his pockets to give her that rare treasure called love. Let's not talk about country old women present in the whole world. There isn't a woman who's more glamorous than your granddaughter's wedding. After getting married, they were still on guard against each other. Rolled her eyes and almost fainted from people cheat on each other. Zhang Meihua's face stiffened as well. They would break up and even see each other as mortal enemies. However, they had never seen a young man like Siyi. He did not say, "I love you" to Yun Jian in front of everyone from the beginning to the end, nor did he show excitement at the engagement banquet and wedding that outsiders could see even if they did not want to Jian's. But Zhang Meihua was smart. However, he was willing to give Yun Jian a relationship with Yun Jian, so she did not dare to say anything about Yun Jian's matters. There was no lack of rich men in the world, but a man like Siyi who could give all of his wealth to Yun Jian when he already had it all was a rare treasure to give all of his wealth to Yun Jian. He was using his actions to tell everyone else in the world he and Yun Jian were going to spend the rest of their lives together. Once, and Yun Jian for the rest of their lives. What about never to leave? Translator. He was willing to turn all of his wealth into a rare treasure called love. Chapter 2562. The engagement party was on the second day. It was already 11 p.m. and it was getting late. They still had to wake up early the next day. Yun Jian and Siyi, as well as most of the guests of the engagement party, had gone to bed early. The stars filled the sky, as if signaling the end of the old era and the beginning of a new era. Off, off, off. It was a different kind of night. Si Luo was holding a heart-shaped wooden stick used for blowing bubbles. She dipped the stick in the bubble solution and blew bubbles at the stars and moon in the sky. It's so cold outside. What are you doing here? Shuang walked out and saw Si Luo sitting alone outside, blowing bubbles with a wooden stick that he had made. He walked over and grabbed Si Luo's arm, wanting to bring him into the house. I miss home. I want to go home. Si Luo, who was usually weak, used her other hand to push Shui Ying's hand away as she spoke expressionlessly. However, her pouting lips made Shui Ying's heart skip a beat. Si Luo had never mentioned her home. Shui Ying had never asked about it either. Seeing Si Luo's upset expression, Shui Ying reached out to hold her hand. But now, even looking at them and talking to them is a luxury. I really
our home.
regret it.
It's my home.
Si Luo's innocence was half an act.
Sister Yun
That was
Jian and the
because
rest
she
are
had
so
to use
happy.
her innocence to
I'm
protect
really
herself.
happy for Sister Yun
Only
Jian,
now did Si
but I
Luo
want to
dare
go
to
home.
open her heart to Shui
I want to
Ying.
go home where
When
Daddy
she
and
was
Mommy
young,
are
she
still
didn't know
around.
how to behave.
But why is it so
She
hard?
thought that it was natural
Why was
for
I
her
so
parents to treat her
disobedient
when I was young. It was only
If I
after
knew
she
that I would
lost them
never
that
see
she
them
learned to
again, I
cherish
would
them.
definitely be obedient.
However, it was all too late.
I would definitely
Shui Ying didn't
be
say
very
anything
obedient.
this time. This time,
He
Si
only
Luo
reached
did not
out his
let
long
go of Shui
arms to
Ying's
pull
hand.
Si Luo into his
She slowly
embrace when
squatted
Si
down
Luo
and
buried
hugged
his
her
head
head
in his sobs.
When he first met
In the
Si
future,
Luo, she
it's
was
my
very
turn to
innocent.
protect you.
However,
My
her
kindness
innocence
to
was
you is
just to
something you
cover
should
up the
accept.
fear and dread in her heart. When I was 13, Daddy's business enemies came knocking on our door. They hired assassins to kill our entire family. I was stuffed under the bed by Mommy. I didn't dare to make a sound. I just watched as my family fell into a pool of blood. I was disobedient when I was young. When I was 6 or 7, life at home wasn't so good. Back then, Daddy and Mommy would wake up before 3 in the morning so that they could eat every day. They went out to sell newspapers and pick up trash. Life at home was too hard. I didn't know how to behave. My family's expenses were not enough to buy me a doll, so Daddy went out to sell blood and bought me a doll. I was so happy back then. After that, Daddy's business and business. I've always thought that Daddy and Mommy, Daddy and Mommy, Daddy and Mommy, Daddy and Mommy. At this point, Si Luo's body trembled violently. She paused for 2 seconds before continuing. When I saw Sister Yun Jian and Mommy Daddy 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 were so happy. Chapter 2563. Shui Ying's last sentence brought tears to Si Luo's eyes. She had always felt guilty about it. Her parents' death was irreversible. But she regretted it. She regretted not being sensible when she was young. She regretted not being as obedient and sensible as she could have been when her parents were still alive. But life was like that. Once you missed it, even the richest person in the world would not be able to buy back the lost past. No one's kindness to you is something you should accept as a matter of course. Including her parents. That was why Si Luo had always been living in guilt. She hated herself for not being sensible and being disobedient when her parents were in their most difficult times. After Mad
She
Dragon
blamed
agreed
herself
to
for
the
not being
unreasonable
able to
request
repay
of
them
the
in
perverted
time.
doctor's son,
But Shui Ying hugged
the
her and
perverted
said,
doctor's son
"I'm good
tied
to you,
Mad
so
Dragon
you should
to an
accept it."
operating table. His
The
kindness to her
perverted
was
doctor's
something she
son
should
held a
accept.
scalpel and rubbed
She
it
didn't
until
need
it made
anything
a
in
conscious
return.
sound.
Just like how
Mad
her
Dragon,
parents
let's
treated
make a
her.
deal.
That
As
sentence
long as
made
you
Si
give me your
Luo's
heart
eyes
for an
turn red.
experiment,
She
I'll
could
save
not
your
hold
woman.
back her tears
I
anymore.
won't go back on my
She
word.
pretended to be naive
The
in order
perverted
to
doctor's
survive.
son looked at
Even
Mad
though Si
Dragon with a
Luo
sinister
pretended to be
expression.
naive back then,
As he
she
said
was
that,
only
the
half
scalpel
sincere.
was about to fall
That was
on
why
Mad
no one
Dragon's
realized
heart.
it. Just as
But
the
now
scalpel
she
was
was
about
truly
to
touched
pierce
by
Mad
Shui
Dragon's
Ying's
heart,
words.
with a
She
bang,
used to think of
the
the
door
world
was
as her
kicked
home.
open. But
At
after
the same
meeting
time,
him,
it
it
was
was
as
as
if
if she
she
had
had
broke
broken
through
the
the
door
door
and
and
entered.
protection. At the
It
same
was so
time,
warm.
a butterfly
She had to
knife
cherish and
stabbed into
accompany
one
you.
of the perverted
She would
doctor's
scold your
son's
parents
eyeballs
for
at a
wanting the
speed that
best for
couldn't
you.
be seen with the
Because
naked
when you
eye.
look back, you might realize that your
The
parents
butterfly
who had
knife
always
pierced
been
the
protecting
eyeball,
you were no
causing
longer
it to
around.
detach from his glasses
The
and burst
engagement
on the
banquet
spot.
was held as
The
usual the
perverted
next day.
doctor's son took a
There
few
was
steps
usually
back
nothing
and
special
wailed
at
in
an
pain.
engagement banquet.
Friends and family would be invited for a meal and a beautiful figure who had just entered swept her gaze across the room. On this day, the most important thing to mention was that in Country Z, the couplet suddenly her lips curled up coldly, grow old together, and she said something that on every street and alley in the country so much that these words appeared on all the trucks on the road. Do you know how much money I spent to recruit him? And on all the restaurants in the country. How dare you lay a finger on one of my kosher mercenaries, all over the world, God's men? Passers-by and residents all asked what was going on. A national celebration was probably nothing more than this. There was nothing worth mentioning at the engagement banquet. After midnight, the engagement banquet was officially over. Mu-Ying did show up the next day, but she had a worried look on her face. Mad Dragon was nowhere to be seen beside Mu-Ying. Yun-Jian was a little confused when she saw him during the day. Yun-Jian suddenly received a text message when the engagement party was just over in the wee hours of the morning. She glanced at the message and walked out. As she walked out, she glanced at Mu-Ying and explained to Ce before she hurriedly left. South Africa, Moon City. At a scientific laboratory. Chapter 2564. Back then Yun-Jian had snatched Mad Dragon from Ce. After snatching Mad Dragon from Ce and forcing Mad Dragon to join the kosher mercenaries, Yun-Jian had to pay Mad Dragon a fixed salary. Mad Dragon's status in the world was second only to Yun-Jian, who was ranked first in the International Secret Service. Although there was a huge difference in the price of their missions, Mad Dragon was ranked second in the world of Secret Service. In spite of it, as God of War who ranked third on the International Secret Agent chart, if Mad Dragon were to perish, Wuxia mercenaries would be the one to suffer the heaviest loss. The psychopathic doctor's son who had his eyeball pierced by the butterfly knife Yun-Jian tossed out wailed as he rolled on the floor, shuddering. When he heard what Yun-Jian said, his other eye that was still intact widened like a fish's eye. He had forgotten. After Mad Dragon left an Hun organization, he had joined the kosher mercenaries. An Hun organization wouldn't pursue the death of an assassin or Secret Service agent, but the kosher mercenaries would. The kosher mercenaries were known internationally for being protective of their own. When he was messing with Mad Dragon, he had completely forgotten that Mad Dragon was now a member of the kosher mercenaries. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. He covered his blinded eye and rolled on the ground, trying to beg for mercy from Yun-Jian. Seeing how terrified he was, Yun-Jian smirked. Like an obedient dog, took out another the man covered his eye and crawled to the side of the laboratory, finding Mad Dragon. He took out a very old book from a hidden bookshelf. Mad Dragon had already been stabbed multiple times by the crazy doctor's son. But Mad Dragon didn't even make a sound. You said you'd let me go. You touched my subordinate. The book into Yun-Jian's now that he's seriously injured, he won't be able to bring any benefits. However, to the kosher mercenaries for the next few months. Holding the secret manual the kosher mercenaries have always been around abruptly and tossed the butterfly knife with her other hand that was swinging it lightly. Yun-Jian stepped with a swoosh, her white shoes making a sound as she man's heart from his back. She walked in front of the crazy doctor's son and said expressionlessly, "Believe no, don't kill me." The crazy doctor's son turned his head around and shouted with all his might. As long as you don't kill me. However, before he could finish, Yun-Jian was already in front of him. The crazy doctor's son was a coward who was afraid of the butterfly knife from the back of the crazy doctor's bleeding eye. She wiped the blood on the knife with a tissue as if she hadn't done anything. His eye pierced. With a red arc, hand over the secret manual that your father taught you. Words of terror that he would ever hear in his life. I have ways to kill you. Slaying God have killed countless people. Yun-Jian saw that the time was right. When have I ever kept my word? If Yun-Jian was like Mad Dragon, asking for the secret manual or begging him for Mu-Ying, then the crazy doctor's son would definitely think that he had something that others couldn't get. Therefore he wouldn't be willing to hand it over for a long time. However, Yun-Jian had pierced his eyeballs just now. There was no way he did not believe that Yun-Jian dared not kill him. Chapter 2565. Page 1/1. As soon as Yun Jian uttered the last word, the psychopath's son's eyes widened and he fell to the ground. He did not even close his eyes as he stared at Yun Jian. If one were to look closely, they would notice that his lips twitched in panic after he heard Yun Jian's last word. His pronunciation was SS, the initials of slaying God. Cough. Why are you here? Mad Dragon had been stabbed several times. He turned to glance at Yun Jian and covered the blood that was flowing out of his wound. Mad Dragon was smart. He knew why Yun Jian wanted the psychopath's son to bring the secret manual that the psychopath had left behind. That perverted Ph.D. student had the habit of taking notes when he was alive, and all his knowledge and wealth were recorded in this secret book. This secret manual was the psychopath's diary when he was alive. With it, Yun Jian could concoct the medicine to save Mu Ying and maintain Mu Ying's life. Therefore, the psychopath's son's life and death were no longer important to Yun Jian and Mad Dragon. They walked out of the laboratory. Mad Dragon held the wounds on his body and suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Essus, can you promise me one thing?" Mad Dragon coughed and asked. "Tell me." Yun Jian had finished wiping the butterfly knife. Her eyes were fixed on it as she spoke calmly. "Don't tell her that I was injured and that I asked for medicine for her. Don't tell her that I almost died." Mad Dragon pleaded. Yun Jian looked up and glanced at Mad Dragon for a second. The next second, she lowered her head expressionlessly and gave her silent consent. "Work hard after you've recovered. The Kosha mercenaries don't keep idle people." That was a promise. Mad Dragon raised a brow and nodded. Yun Jian returned to Hubble Island in the early morning of the next day. The engagement banquet was never going to be lively because it was reserved for the wedding ceremony. The wedding ceremony was as lively as it could be. Yun Jian and Si Yi's wedding date was set. It would be held on the 1st of April, which was Yun Jian's birthday. That was the day Yun Jian turned 20 years old and could go to the Civil Affairs Bureau with Si Yi to get their marriage certificate. Fortunately, there was still some time before the wedding ceremony. "Jian, the guests have gone back. We should pack up and go back to Longmen City." Qin Yiru mentioned the engagement banquet to Yun Jian after it was over. "Mom, you go back first. I'll take Xiao Jian on a trip this afternoon." The engagement banquet had just ended, but Si Yi addressed Qin Yiru as Mom, naturally, sounding like he had practiced it thousands of times. After that, Si Yi kept a straight face as if he was afraid that the two troublesome children would tag along, but he added, "It's just me and Xiao Jian going on a trip." Qin Yiru knew that Si Yi did not want to bring the two children with him at once. She smiled and nodded. Okay. I'll take Yuan and Mingyu. Have fun." In the end, Si Yi's plan did not work out. Si Yi had planned to leave Hubble Island with Yun Jian, but the little boy had noticed them somehow. As if knowing that Si Yi was going to leave him and his sister behind to take Yun Jian out, the little guy scurried over and mumbled, "I'm not sure." "Aya, Daddy. Let's pee together." Peeing together meant that they were going together. Once the little boy came out, the girl noticed that Yun Jian and Si Yi were leaving too. Both of them cried and threw a tantrum, so Yun Jian brought them along. On the bus to Country D, Si Yi's chiseled features were dark throughout the journey. Both children sat on Yun Jian's lap and babbled excitedly. They met a middle-aged man from Country Z along the way. Like Yun Jian and Si Yi, he was also bringing his family to India for a vacation. Seeing both children sitting on Yun Jian's lap and Si Yi looking glum, the middle-aged man greeted Yun Jian and glanced at Si Yi before telling Yun Jian, "You're both taking care of your children. Is this the stepfather of the two children? It must be tough for you to take care of them alone. Young lady, it must be hard on you. I'm a parent too, I know how tough it is to take care of children." Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Chapter 2566. The middle-aged man didn't know about the relationship between Ce and Yun Jian. Earlier he had greeted Yun Jian. Now he saw Ce sitting by the bus window, looking out of the window with an expression that said he didn't want to see the two children. Seeing that there was no expression on his cold face, the middle-aged man automatically assumed that Ce was unhappy with the two children's arrival. If he wasn't a stepfather, then what was he? The middle-aged man's name was Lu Jingdong. He was already 38 years old. He was traveling with his wife and two children who weren't even 10 years old. Could be said that he doted on his children to the extreme. Lu Jingdong was the biological father of his children, so he always felt that a child's biological parents would definitely be extremely good to their children. The feeling that Ce gave him made Lu Jingdong think that Ce was the stepfather of the little boy and the little girl. That was why he said those words. Lu Jingdong didn't mean to say those words. However, after he said those words, Ce's sharp black eyes glanced sideways at him. Seeing this, Lu Jingdong was so frightened that his body trembled and he didn't say anything else. By the time he reacted, Ce had already grabbed the clothes on the back of the little boy's back with one hand and pulled him onto his lap. From the beginning to the end, when they arrived at their destination,
didn't say a word.
Yun Jian
They're a
parted
married
ways
couple.
with Chen Min's family.
Why the hell are you talking
D country
about
wasn't
stepfather?
rich and the status
You're the
of women in
stepfather.
D country was very
Lu
low.
Jingdong's wife
Yun
was a
Jian
very
and Ce
honest
found a
person
hotel
based
to
on her
stay in.
appearance.
The Golden
After
Temple
hearing
was
her
her
husband's
world-famous
words,
tourist
she reached out
attraction,
to grab Lu
so very
Jingdong's
few
ear
people
and
came to
gently
visit
twisted it.
The hotel
Then
that
she
Yun
smiled
Jian
at
and
Yun
Ce
Jian.
found was one of
My
the bigger
husband
hotels.
is outspoken and speaks
When they entered the
carelessly.
hotel, they met a
Don't
group
mind
of
him,
tourists
little
from
girl.
Z country.
It's fine.
There were also other
Yun
groups
Jian
from all
replied.
over the world.
Nonsense.
After Yun Jian
Why
and
are you
Ce
still
checked
fooling
in,
around
the
in
group
the
of
future?
tourists from Z
They're a
country
loving
saw Yun
couple.
Jian and Ce.
Lu Jingdong's
One of the
wife
people in
patted
charge
Lu
of the
Jingdong
tour
and
walked over and
reprimanded
said
him
to
in her
Yun Jian
native
and
dialect.
Ce, "Hello,
Lu Jingdong
everyone."
scratched his head and really
I'm
didn't
the
say
person in
anything.
charge of the tour group.
Halfway through the
Everyone
bus
calls
ride,
me Golden
Lu
Gold.
Jingdong's wife started
It's like
chatting
this.
with Yun Jian
D
out of
country
boredom.
has very few
Lu
toilets
Jingdong's
and the
wife
status
was
of
called
women
Chen
is
Min.
low.
She was a
I see
very
that there are
honest
two
person.
women in your family.
She had two children,
It's a little
boy and a
dangerous
girl.
to travel here
Therefore,
alone.
when he saw
Are
that
you
Yun
interested
Jian
in
was
joining
young
our
and had
tour
two
group?
children, one boy and
Come.
one girl,
Wonderful
he became
bookhouse.
interested and talked to Yun Jian more. Yun Jian and Ce's destination was the Golden Temple in D country. The Golden Temple was a must-visit for tourists to D country. The golden roof of the Golden Temple was built with 880 kilograms of gold. Its scale was very majestic. Upon hearing that Yun Jian and Ce were also going to the Golden Temple, Chen Min hugged her 7-year-old daughter and said excitedly, "My family is also going there to play." It went smoothly. What a coincidence. In contrast to Chen Min's excitement, Yun Jian merely blinked her eyes. Chapter 2567. Our tour group specializes in tourism activities and has even hired a few bodyguards to protect everyone's safety. After all, who doesn't want to return to their homeland safely and happily? How about it? Do you want to join us? The person in charge of the tour group, who called himself Jin, took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and handed one to Ce while introducing the benefits. Needless to say, Jin was the person in charge of the tour group. When he saw Yun Jian and Ce with the two children, he saw Yun Jian and Ce as glowing silver. Hence, he hurried over and tried to pull Yun Jian and Ce into the group. Unexpectedly, Yun Jian and Ce ignored Jin and walked around him into the hotel room. Seeing this, Jin snorted and turned around. "Hey brother, did you fail to get a guest? Haha, she doesn't even care about you. But that girl is really beautiful. That waist, if I can ride her a few times, I'll laugh out loud in my dreams." Jean turned around
when the
and
group
saw
of
a man
people
who was
arrived at the
slightly
toilet
taller
5
than
kilometers
Jean.
away, they all
However,
rushed there.
his facial
Oh
features
my
were
God.
uglier than
Even the
Jean's.
toilet is 5
I don't like
kilometers
that
away
guy.
in this godforsaken
Jean
place.
glanced in the
Luckily,
direction that
I don't live in
this
this
godforsaken
godforsaken place.
He put the
Otherwise,
cigarette
I would
that he
go
wanted to
crazy.
pass to CE
One
in
of the
his
women
mouth,
said,
lit it,
then
took a
everyone
puff,
started
and blew out
chatting.
the smoke. In the dark,
What?
Jean
Do you
and
want
the
to do
perverted
him?
man,
Brother,
who had
I'll follow
followed them
you.
all the way here,
The perverted man in
accidentally
front of
discovered that
Jean
Yun
said,
Jian had come out
"This game."
alone.
So,
Jean
in order
glanced
to
at the
vent their
perverted
anger
man
during the
and
day,
didn't reply.
the two of them planned to
The
lay their
original
hands
plan
on
was
Yun
to
Jian.
visit the Golden
I've
Temple the
attracted
next
the
day,
group of old
so Yun
bachelors in
Jian went
town
to bed
here.
early. These
At
women
3
will
in the
probably
morning, the
lose
little
their
girl
virginity.
woke up because she
When
wanted
the
to
time
pee.
comes, we'll
She
cover our
cried and
faces
said
and
the
no
word
one will
chill.
recognize us.
The little girl
We'll
needed
F
someone to look
asterisk
after
CK
her.
all the women.
So CE stayed
We'll
behind
also
while
save
Yun
money on
Jian
finding
carried
a
the
prostitute
little girl out.
How awesome.
She also wanted to go to the
perverted
toilet.
man said
Germany
in a
was a
perverted
country
voice.
that was extremely
She'll
short
lower your
of
voice.
toilets. She's
Women
coming
here
out.
could only go to the
Jean
toilet twice a
suddenly
day,
covered
and
the
they had to go to the
perverted man's
toilet
mouth.
in pairs. They saw Yun
After
Jian
asking
walking
around,
around
the
the
toilet.
news he got was
The
that
rest
the
of the
toilet
women
was
also
5
left the
kilometers
toilet.
away from the hotel.
At the moment when
The little
everyone
girl
was ready to
fine
go
after
back
she
together,
finished peeing
Yun
outside the
Jian,
door,
who had walked out of
after
the toilet
sending
as
the
if
little
nothing
girl
had
back to the
happened,
hotel,
suddenly
Yun
raised
Jian
her
walked
eyes.
out by himself.
The pair of eyes
She
under
planned
her
to go to
bangs
the
seemed to be
toilet
stained with strange
away.
red streaks
Country
under the
D was
moonlight.
such a country.
Then, in
There was
front
an
of all the
extreme
women
lack of
present,
toilets.
as well as Jean
In Country
and the
D, the
perverted
chances
man
of
who were
women
hiding
being
in the
raped
dark
when they went to the
she
toilet in the
immediately
middle of
opened
the
her
night
mouth
were
and
quite
said
high.
something that made
Just as
everyone
Yun
panic.
Jian walked out,
You've
she
been
bumped
following
into
us all
Chen
the
Min,
way.
who was on the bus.
Are you still not planning
Hey,
to
are you
come
going to
out?
the toilet too? I heard that the toilet is 5 kilometers away. It's not safe for us to go there alone. So, I decided to go with everyone. Chen Min greeted Yun Jian. Beside Chen Min were a few Z Country women who were traveling with the Z Country tour group. Since they were on the same path, Yun Jian didn't refuse. Chapter 2568. 5 kilometers away from the hotel, there was a toilet. This toilet was piled up with stones and looked dilapidated. Although the people outside could not see the people inside the toilet was so dilapidated that it looked like it would fall down with a push. Yun Jian was standing 10 meters away from the toilet. Under the moonlight that was about to set in the west, her straight and slender figure was enough to arouse men's desire. But at this time, she stood in the same spot as if nothing had happened and suddenly said this sentence out of nowhere. As soon as she finished speaking, Jean and the perverted man who were hiding in the dark, as well as Chen Min, as well as the group of women who had come with the group to use the restroom, were all stunned. What do you mean by following us all the way? Don't scare me. It's so dark here. There's no one around. One of the women tugged at her clothes and her face turned pale. She looked around and was clearly frightened to the point that she let out a cry. The other women who came with her trembled when they heard Yun Jian's words. Among the group of people who came here, 3 or 2 were men. And the whole group was from Z Country. Although it was 3 o'clock in the morning, the people from Z Country had long heard that there were few toilets in D Country. Moreover, the chances of women going to the toilet alone were very high. Therefore, these women gathered a lot of people in the middle of the night and went to the toilet 5 kilometers away. A few of the women even dragged their boyfriends or husbands with them. They were the 3 or 2 men who were standing at the scene. 3 minutes after Yun Jian spoke, after confirming that Yun Jian was deliberately beside her was holding her man's arm. Everyone present turned their attention to Yun Jian. She was not afraid of trouble and replied to Yun Jian in a loud voice when they were discovered. What's the matter? Then they turned around quietly and wanted to escape. They had originally planned to take advantage of the situation when the group of old bachelors from D Country relied on her husband's protection and was not afraid that there were people around. But they had been discovered. That's right. What kind of hearing did that woman have? There's no sound around. Jean and the wretched man this just because you're young and prepared to leave. We're old and can't stand being scared. However, just as she and the wretched man were about to leave,
As
All
soon
the
as the
women
woman
began to
holding her
accuse
husband's
Yun Jian.
arm finished speaking, the rest of the
Yun
women
Jian,
also
who
agreed
was standing
and
on
stood
the
on the
spot,
side of the woman
raised her
holding her
hand
husband's
slightly,
arm, and 3 knives were caught in the gap between her
Were you
fingers.
trying to scare?
She didn't
In
even
a
look
dark
at them, and threw the
environment,
knife in her
people
hand
would
into
more
the
or
dark.
less be surrounded
No
by
one
a
saw
sense
that
of
in the
ambience.
night. 3
At
knives
this
were
moment,
nailed
the
to the thick
surroundings
tree
were
trunk
gloomy.
in front of Jin
Only
and
the
the
round
wretched
moon
man
hanging in
who
the
were
sky
about
that
to
was
escape.
about to set in the
It was
west
night,
could vaguely
and Jin
illuminate
and the
the
wretched
earth.
man already
They were
felt guilty
surrounded
for
by
doing
trees.
something bad.
In such
At
a
this
place,
moment, they
it was
suddenly
inevitable
saw 3
that she
knives
would be a
flying
little
past
scared.
them and stabbing into
In
the
addition,
tree
the
trunk.
crime rate in
The knives
Germany
that
was
suddenly
relatively
appeared were
high
like
overall.
ghosts. Under everyone's gaze, the 2 of them were so scared that they screamed and rolled to where Yun Jian and the others were. As they crawled and rolled, they shouted, F***CK ghost, ghost, ghost. What the hell? Ghost. Chapter 2569. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. 2 silhouettes suddenly sprung out from the dark forest, causing everyone who accused Yun Jian of scaring them to shudder. There's really someone? The woman holding her husband's arm was so scared that her face turned pale. She couldn't help but turn to look at Yun Jian. How did she know that someone was following them? Tour Guide Jean? Tour Guide Meng? Why are you here? Just when everyone was panicking at the sight of Jin and the wretched man rushing out from the dark, someone recognized them and asked in surprise. Cough. We saw that it was not safe for you to come out alone, so we followed you and planned to protect you from behind. I was planning to secretly escort you back. Jin reacted quickly. He quickly made up a story and spoke as if it was true. Then Jin pushed the perverted man who was Tour Guide Meng. Cough. Cough cough cough. Yes. Tour Guide Meng quickly said after being pushed by Jin. Tour Guide Meng, you're so professional. Thank goodness I chose your tour group. The woman holding her husband's arm was grateful after hearing Jin and Tour Guide Meng's words. Everyone else also looked at Jin and Tour Guide Meng with gratitude. Yun Jian only glanced at Jin. The little guy was completely unaware that he had wet his own diaper. The next moment, his hands and feet were like a turtle when it was turned over, climbing up and down left and right. Immediately. He was so cute that people couldn't help but want to kiss his forehead and left first. At this moment, with the previous family also walked out. The rest of the group quickly followed. Seeing the little fellow's face, a minute later, a group of old bachelors from Country D arrived and realized that there was no one there. He'll definitely be a handsome guy in the future. After Those
hearing
two tour
this,
guides
Yun
from
Jian
Country D
politely dared
thanked
to
her.
lie to us.
At this moment,
We'll get him tomorrow.
CE had already rudely
One of the old
removed the
bachelors
baby's
of
diaper.
Country D
He
stomped
took
his
a new
feet
one
and
and
spoke in
skillfully
Country
changed
D's
the
language.
baby's diaper.
Everyone
However,
quickly
just
returned
as he
to
was
the
about
hotel.
to change the
The
baby's
next
diaper,
morning, Yun
the
Jian
little fellow
carried the
made
little
another
girl.
C carried the little
A
girl
stream
and
of
walked
urine
downstairs.
sprayed onto CE's
Early
face
in the
like a
morning,
fountain.
they prepared to
Translator,
leave for Country
Henyi
D's scenic
Translations
spot,
Editor,
the Golden Temple.
Henyi Translations.
Just as they went downstairs, they met the tour group. There was also Min's family. Min greeted Yun Jian. Yun Jian just nodded slightly. As soon as they walked out of the hotel, the little guy clenched his fists and made a few sound. Yun Jian naturally figured out the attributes of the little fellow and the little girl. Without exception, the little fellow's voice indicated that the little fellow had peed. Children don't know any better, so they pee directly on the diapers. Yun Jian asked CE to put the baby down on a clean step at the entrance of the hotel. She reached out to change the baby's diaper. Let me do it. CE gently grabbed her wrist and personally changed the baby's diaper. Hee.
Chapter 2570. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Naughty CE Tiantaihahu, page 1/1. CE moved to the side the moment the little guy spat out the urine. His speed was too fast for anyone to react to. However, the little guy's speed was too fast and CE's shirt was stained with the little guy's pee. CE's face darkened. Go back and change. I'll do it for him. Yunjian choked back the laughter. She was about to burst out laughing at the sight of him. She walked over and placed the little girl on the steps. She quickly changed the little guy's diaper. Needless to say, the little guy was amazing. This was not the first time he had to pee while changing a diaper. However, every time he did it, he would not spill it on himself. Don't laugh, this was a profound skill that required a good grasp of strength. went into the bathroom to take a bath. Face darkened as the two of them made a lot of noise and didn't fall asleep until midnight. Came over and whispered to Yunjian. Seeing that the night was beautiful. Hey, my husband said that your husband was like the child insisted on buying when they were shopping at the Golden Temple and went up to the rooftop. It was as if he really wanted to strangle the hotel. It was as if he had a deep hatred for the child. The highest floor in the vicinity. After that, Chinmin winked at Yunjian. Looking down from here, they could see the entire scene, but the rooftop of the hotel could not be seen from located not far from the hotel. The night was dark. The roof of the Golden Temple was made of one hand and looked at the stars and not be measured by money. Of course, if someone wanted to steal from the Golden Temple, it was obviously illogical. After all, this place was heavily guarded, just as she was about to turn around to find out what was going on, a familiar chest came into her embrace. Unless someone was able to move the temple. It's been a long time since we last met. The moment the rich voice rang, Yunjian could even feel a certain part of clapped her hands excitedly when she saw the Golden Temple made of shining gold. Henyi Translations Editor. At this moment, tour guides Jin and Meng were sitting not far away. Both of them were wearing masks. That was because early in the morning, the old bachelor who had failed to get his way yesterday had caught them and beaten them up. Jin and Meng Jin clenched their fists. Their anger towards Yunjian and CE increased by another level. Brother, I can't take this lying down, tour guide Meng said. I can't take this lying down either. Jin replied. Suddenly the two of them who were originally looking at Yunjian and CE's family of four, looked at each other and formed a conspiracy. To reach the Golden Temple, one had to climb the nameless mountain near the Golden Temple. Usually, people who came here to play would be recommended by the hotel to visit the Golden Temple first before going to Nameless Mountain. Of course, most people would visit the Golden Temple on the first day and Nameless Mountain on the second. On the way back, Chinmin made an appointment with Yunjian to go to Nameless Mountain with Yunjian the next day. Yunjian agreed. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Yunjian finally coaxed the little fellow and the little girl to sleep. Chapter 2571. Yunjian hadn't come to the rooftop to let CE do this. Even if the rooftop of this hotel was on the 6th floor, it was pitch black, and the moon wasn't very bright. Dark clouds had covered the sky, so there wasn't a single bit of light in the surroundings. She wouldn't cooperate with him here. Let's go back. The children are still here. Yunjian was about to say this when she suddenly felt CE gently bite her most sensitive ear. In that instant, Yunjian felt her entire body go numb. However, CE seemed determined to have her this time. He grabbed Yunjian's wrist with one hand and reached his other hand into the corner of her shirt. Under Yunjian's loose clothes, he grabbed her tender spot. Yunjian couldn't help but let out a soft moan. She hurriedly covered her mouth and leaned against CE's shoulder. With her height, she only reached CE's chin. She tiptoed so that her chin could reach his shoulder. When CE heard Yunjian's soft moan, his eyes turned scarlet. In the next moment, he carried Yunjian horizontally and walked to the rooftop warehouse door. The bridge was 600 meters above the ground inside. Because it was very sturdy, very long. Everyone wanted to walk on it. The dark clouds in the sky gradually dispersed. Let's go too. Revealing the full moon. Just thinking about it makes me excited.
The twinkling stars on it and the suspension bridge gradually approached each other and eventually overlapped with each other.
Chin Min excitedly led Yun Jian and the others
to the suspension bridge that was suspended from the cliff around 10 in the afternoon. The suspension bridge was 100 meters long.
Should have been waiting for quite some time.
Quickly led Yun Jian's family
Chin Min's
of four
family
to the
was
suspension
very
bridge.
friendly.
Just
they
as they
didn't blame
walked
Yun
onto the
Jian for
swaying
oversleeping
and even asked Yun Jian if she was too tired from playing with the two children yesterday.
Oh my
Actually,
God!
Taking care of the two children wasn't tiring for Yun Jian at all.
Chin Min looked down at the 600
meters
meters
below them, and her
I'm
face
fine.
turned pale.
Yun Jian replied indifferently.
The surrounding area
also
had
a
well
husband.
protected.
Seeing Yun
So
Jian
many
like
people
this,
have
she
walked
just
on the
smiled.
suspension bridge.
There were
and
many
nothing
people
happened.
climbing the nameless
How can we
mountain?
be the only ones
Other
in
than the
trouble?
Golden Temple,
A stranger
nameless
laughed
mountain
and said,
was a must-visit
At this
attraction.
moment, Yun Jian
Because
and the
this
others
place was
walked
very
to the center of
beautiful.
the suspension
All the stones,
bridge.
flowers,
Because
and
below
trees
them
were all
was an
natural,
empty 600
and the air
meters
here was
in the
very
air.
fresh.
Everyone was a
Yun
little
Jian
frightened.
and the others quickly
However,
climbed to
just
the
as
top
the
of the
man
mountain.
finished speaking,
What made
the
Yun
chain
Jian
on the
feel
side of the
strange was that
drawbridge
she had been
suddenly
in the
loosened a
circle of
little.
assassins and
Everyone
secret agents
panicked and
for so
didn't
many
dare to
years.
move.
Except
In the
for
next
the beginning,
second,
she
the
had
chain
never
suddenly
felt sore
loosened
in
her
her legs.
without warning.
But today, when
The
she
chain
carried
on
the
the
little
left
girl
side
up
of
the
the
mountain,
suspension
her
bridge
beautiful
broke.
legs actually
At
trembled
this moment,
involuntarily.
someone's frightened voice
because of
rang
the little
out.
fellow and the little
Hearing
girl.
that, everyone who
hadn't
was still
tasted
standing on the
fresh for a
suspension
long
bridge
time.
turned pale with
Yesterday
fright.
he had done
If
it
the
with her 8
suspension
times
bridge
in one
collapsed,
go. It would be
Yun Jian
equivalent
even
to them
suspected
falling
that
off a
C had
600-meter high
kidneys.
cliff.
We're
They
almost
would
at the
definitely
suspension
die.
bridge.
Swoosh, swoosh,
Nameless
swoosh.
Mountain is most
The
famous
sound
for
of
its
the chain
suspension
gradually
bridge.
breaking was like a nightmare that lingered in everyone's ears. It's over. It's over this time. I don't want to die. The people standing on the suspension bridge were so frightened that they didn't dare to move. They were afraid that if they moved, the sound of the chain breaking would become even faster. The workers by the cliff were already thinking of a solution. However, just as the chain was about to break completely and everyone thought that the people standing on the suspension bridge would be thrown off the cliff. Chapter 2572. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, page 1/1. The suspension bridge was 100 meters long. Huge thick chains and some special materials were used to hang the bridge from the edge of the cliff between the two mountains. The bridge was firmly suspended in the air between the two mountains, which were 600 meters above the ground without any defensive measures. There were a few small suspension bridges that were suspended above the water, and the suspension bridges were only half a meter above the water. Even if there was a lake flowing violently below, there was a suspension bridge on both sides of the lake. Ordinary people who walked across the suspension bridge would be scared to death. Because there were at least dozens of people standing on the suspension bridge, some people would hold the railing and violently step on it in order to increase the excitement. At this time, even if they imagined themselves falling into the lake, they would panic and tremble. Not to mention that Yun Jian and the rest were standing on a suspension bridge that was 600 meters above the ground. If they fell, it would be a dead end. Furthermore, the suspension bridge's defensive measures were usually very sturdy and should be 100% safe. But the chains suddenly broke. This was something that no one could imagine. When the suspension bridge broke, there were at least 100 people on the suspension bridge. With so many people, even if the workers at the side pulled on the chains, they would not have the strength to hold on until the people at the foot of the mountain came to rescue them. In this kind of situation, it was usually certain death. Just when everyone thought that they were scared out of their wits, Yun Jian suddenly flipped over and stepped on the thin railings of the suspension bridge. Like a circus performer walking on a tightrope, she walked on the railings that were used as handrails when people walked on the suspension bridge. Not only did she not fall, moreover, she was sprinting towards the side of the cliff where the suspension bridge had broken the iron chain. The suspension bridge was full of people and walking on the railings was the fastest way to reach the cliff. But other than Yun Jian, most people would not even be able to stand on the railings. Even the circus performer who walked on a tightrope would not be able to do this in this kind of situation. Quickly look. That young lady. She actually... When they saw what Yun Jian did, the workers at the side suddenly saw Yun Jian stepping on the railings of the suspension bridge and running towards them at a speed. She was running on the railing of the drawbridge again. They were so shocked that they shouted out loud. Hurry up! What was she trying to do? Fortunately, the iron chains were really going to fall.
Just
Who the
now
hell is
when the
this
staff
woman?
reacted, they
Mommy,
had
save
already
me.
hugged the iron chain
The tourists
tightly.
who were hugging
The
the
rest of the
railing of the
people who didn't
suspension
get on the
bridge tightly
suspension bridge
did
and
not
were
dare to
compassionate
move.
also ran up to help the workers pull the chains. However, there were nearly 100 people on the suspension bridge. Their strength was not enough to pull on the chains, and they would not be able to hold on for long. Especially now that Yun Jian was running on the railing of the suspension bridge, it was simply putting pressure on them. Quick! Stop her. We can't hold on any longer. Is the engineer who can repair the chains on the mountain. A staff member pulled on the completely broken chain with everyone else. He used all his strength and even the veins on his neck were protruding. He used all his strength to yell in a hoarse voice. Everyone who was holding on to the broken end of the chain used all their strength. Not everyone in the world was evil. This group of people who reached out to help had no relationship with the people trapped on the suspension bridge, but they reached out to help and held on to the chains tightly. Their feet were slowly inching towards the edge of the cliff. They could let go and then they would be safe, but they were still trying their best. They could not hold on any longer. Just when everyone thought that the people on the suspension bridge would be thrown off the cliff like a kite with a broken string, Yun Jian had already landed on the flat ground with ease. She quickly walked to the broken chain, and without saying anything she took the tool that she had prepared to use again. She used the tool to rub the broken part of the chain, and in a few moves the broken part of the chain was perfectly repaired. She successfully completed this series of steps in less than a minute. At this moment, the workers who were holding on tightly to the chains and waiting for the engineer to come up and fix the chains, as well as the tourists, including the people on the suspension bridge who were criticizing Yun Jian for putting pressure on them, were all stunned. Their eyes widened. 3 minutes later, the staff from just now took the lead and exclaimed at Yun Jian when they realized what was going on. Are you the top engineer in the world? Normal engineers would not be able to repair the suspension bridge so quickly. We hired the top engineers in the world to maintain and build the suspension bridge. Around us, only Mr. Kenani has the ability to fix the current problem. May I know your name? Translator, Tim. Editor, Tim. Chapter 2573. There were so many people at the scene just now, and there were also repair tools at the scene. However, the staff and the tourists were desperately holding on to the iron chain. No one tried to fix it because no one knew how to fix it. Actually, it wasn't that there weren't any engineers at the scene, but this engineer didn't know how to fix such a difficult thing. This engineer only checked the safety factor of the suspension bridge every day. Don't be fooled by the dangerous games in the amusement park as well as the suspension bridge, where one mistake could lead to heavy losses. It required the relevant personnel to be stationed all year round to check the danger factor every day. After this staff member took the lead to call out to Yun Jian, the surrounding people were all stunned. The people on the suspension bridge were scared silly. Everyone immediately left the suspension bridge. The women were all wiping their tears. It was obvious that they were really frightened. As for the men who didn't want to cry because of their pride, they were so scared that their legs were trembling. Scared me to death. I don't dare to come to this kind of place anymore. Chin Min hugged her child tightly. She was so scared that her face turned pale. Even at the most frightening moment just now, Chin Min's first reaction was to hug her child tightly. Just now the situation was urgent. When they went up the mountain, Si was carrying the two children because he was afraid that Yun Jian would be tired. That was why Yun Jian was able to rush to the cliff to save the situation. At that time, Si didn't have the slightest bit of modesty. The little girl and the little guy were laughing and playing with each other in Si's arms. They didn't feel the slightest bit of danger. After recovering from her shock, Chen Min walked to Yun Jian. She saw that Yun Jian's family of 4 didn't seem frightened at all. She swallowed hard and said to Yun Jian, You weren't scared just now? You actually did something so dangerous. What if you fell? Chen Min had just finished speaking when Yun Jian interrupted her. In my world there are no accidents. In her world there was only success. There were no accidents. Chen Min swallowed her saliva and didn't say anything else. The accident happened too suddenly, but thank you very much. On behalf of all the staff and all the tourists who almost died on the suspension bridge, I would like to apologize to you for doubting your ability. Thank you, young lady. After a false alarm, the staff member walked up to Yun Jian and bowed to her sincerely. The staff member thought that Yun Jian would say, You're welcome, but Yun Jian sneered and said to him in a sarcastic tone, Do you really think that the breaking of the chain was an accident? You will definitely know what is going on. The staff member was stunned. Yun-Jian glanced at the staff coldly. Investigate who sent the staff away to touch the chains yesterday and today. This accident that almost happened was completely caused by the negligence of the staff. This was not something that could be forgiven with just a word of thanks and an apology. It's him. It must be those two. Now that I think about it, they made excuses to send us away this morning. It must be them. One of the staff members also heard Yun-Jian's words. The staff member frowned and suddenly pointed at Jin and tour guide Meng, who were standing not far away. Everyone was shocked. Jin and tour guide Meng saw this and didn't say anything to refute. They were so scared that they turned around and ran away. Stop them. Quick. The crowd panicked. But just as Jin and tour guide Meng were about to walk down the mountain, everyone saw a small figure swish in front of Jin and tour guide Meng. She raised her leg high and kicked Jin and tour guide Meng to the ground. Several staff members quickly rushed over. Yun-Jian kicked Jin and tour guide Meng in front of several staff members and said coldly, "Send these two guys to the international prison. Tell them the code word. If they become gods by killing, they will never be able to get out of prison in this lifetime." Chapter 2574. Page 1/1. Killing to become a god was a code word. The international prison was a place to imprison international criminals. It was said that once you entered the international prison, you could forget about coming out alive. Those who were sent to the international prison either had their arms or legs broken. Their lives there were more painful than death. And Yun-Jian had some friendship with the boss of the international prison. In other words, Jin and tour guide Meng's actions had seriously endangered the lives of many people. Yun-Jian, on the other hand, told the staff to throw Jin and tour guide Meng into the international prison. This was no different from killing Jin and tour guide Meng. This staff member was almost killed by Jin and tour guide Meng. If the suspension bridge broke, everyone would be buried here. Jin and tour guide Meng would not leave any traces, and the staff would be the ones to suffer. Perhaps because of Jin and tour guide Meng, these staff members would be ruined for the rest of their lives. One had to know that since the suspension bridge was built, it meant that the suspension bridge was definitely not dangerous. Of course, unless it was man-made. The staff member was disgusted with Jin and tour guide Meng after finding out about their behavior. Hearing Yun-Jian's words, the staff member hurriedly responded, "She would set off for Yun Province's Hidden Dragon Mountain. They are severely punished." On the Hidden Dragon Mountain, at this time, there was a third artifact that was enough to kill the mysterious man. About this. She had never forgotten. They stood up one by one, and personally escorted she had to go back to Jiangxing City to study for a period of time. The group of tourists who had been brought to the country by Jin and tour guide Meng all saw that she was halfway through packing. Those two evil people. He stretched out his slender fingers and massaged his temples. I didn't expect them to almost harm us. If there's something I'm hiding from you, will you blame me? He asked abruptly. As it turned out, his words made Yun-Jian's hand pause in the middle of packing. After staying in country D for 3 days, your mind when you're alive and your mind when you're dead. Returning to Longmen City in a low-key manner by document to Yun-Jian. After Yun-Jian and CE returned to Longmen City, glanced at the document nonchalantly. The news reported that her pupils contracted in the next tour group had lost their humanity, who had always been innocent people had died at country D's nameless mountain. On the document that made Yun-Jian's expression change, even the heavens was written as follows. Anymore. Top reading. On the way to the international prison, the truck carrying them suddenly flipped over and went down the mountain. Jin and tour guide Meng were killed on the spot. On the other hand, the driver of the truck was completely unscathed. There was no sign of injury at all. When Yun Jian saw the news, she closed her eyes and turned to look at Ce, who was staring at her intently. Needless to say, this matter was definitely done by him. Of course, Yun Jian didn't ask too much. She packed her luggage and planned to go back to school in Jiangqing City. Chapter 2575. There weren't many things in the world that could make Yun Jian reveal such an expression. However, what was written in the information was beyond Yun Jian's imagination. Is this true? Yun Jian pursed her red lips. Her shocked and incredulous expression was replaced by an unconcealable joy. I've been hiding it from you because of Enhun's rules. They don't allow the assassins and agents in the organization to have any attachments. Your brother is an exception. Ce nodded. He had been hiding this from her for a long time. At first, it was because he had lost his memory of being a senior immortal and didn't recognize Yun Jian. Therefore, he only treated her as an agent of Enhun. Later, he couldn't bring himself to say it. He was afraid that the loving relationship he had built with great difficulty would be ruined by this incident. Finally, he mustered up the courage to speak. As the leader of Enhun, Ce killed people without batting an eyelid. He never did things sloppily. The economic conditions here were more backward than whenever it concerned her. Many people could still be seen huddled up in public places such as the train station. Mustering up the courage to speak. It was a 19-year-old girl with a black hat on her head before he met Yun Jian. She was dressed in simple clothes, but they couldn't hide for Yun Jian to be angry with him after she read the information he gave her. At a dirty place. However, Yun Jian's hand that was holding the information trembled violently. Yun Jian in the next moment, she suddenly threw the information on the floor and rushed up to him. Yun Jian saw her door open just as she reached the staircase. She used her actions to tell Ce that after she found out about this incident, it didn't matter if she was angry or not. Instead, she became even more proactive. That parents in her past life Yun Jian's unprecedented actions. It was Ce back then who got someone to hide this matter, so she couldn't find out about it no matter how hard she tried. Ce must have taken out this information when he had just confirmed his relationship with Yun Jian. Then wouldn't he be able to eat meat earlier? He might even have formed a football team. He Province, Suzhou. As a province in the central region, He Province wasn't prosperous, but it didn't retire either. In Suzhou of He Province, the class differentiation was very obvious. In the city, the rich were filthy rich while the poor were so poor that they had to beg. In this era, the country had yet to give all homeless people a place to stay. Now there were no longer any homeless people who begged on the streets. They didn't even have a place to sleep at night, so they had to sleep in the gutters. That was because the country was paying for these poor homeless people. Everyone could eat their fill and eat well. At this point, he had to mention that it was good for the country to be strong. In this era, there were still many homeless people on the streets. Longmen City had always been a place where men plowed and women weaved, so there were basically no beggars in Longmen City. He Province's Suzhou was different.
Chapter 2576. Page 1/1. Most of the people in the slums lived a life of hunger and cold. Here they would be satisfied if they were able to eat a full meal. Standing in the dilapidated house that was only 2 stories tall, Yunjian's eyes flashed coldly as she looked at the middle-aged woman who was dressed in sackcloth that was patched with rags. The woman walked around the back of the burning stove and pressed her hand on her waist. She slowly bent down and picked up a piece of firewood and stuffed it into the stove. Then, she walked back to her original spot and continued to stir-fry the rice with only a few pieces of vegetables. The house was old and dark. When people stepped on the floor it would make creaking sounds. It gave people the illusion that they could step on air at any time. "Miss, make way, make way." Just as Yunjian stood outside the door and stared at the simple house that was not closed with a glint in her eyes, unable to move who she was looking for. An old lady's voice came from behind her. But when the old lady looked up, Yunjian was already gone. Yunjian aside and rushed into the house before Yunjian. Because Zhou ran too fast, she said to the middle-aged woman who was stir-frying. Her hands were quick, and she supported herself on the ground to stand up. It's at Westgate Market. Her knees were heavily rubbed against the ground, stop them but she didn't care about the pain in her knees and rushed to the Westgate Market. "Hurry up and go take a look." "Say it again." The middle-aged woman was different from Chinyiru, and my little brother will come back too. Her hands were almost skinny. Don't talk about my mom like that. Her face was full of yellow spots. My mom isn't a jinx. However, one could vaguely see that she was also a great beauty when she was young. 7 meters tall, the middle-aged woman's surname was Zhou, and her name was Ran, while fighting with 4 or 5 boys. When Zhou Ran heard the old lady's words, had the upper hand, but later on 4 or 5 boys worked together to suppress the girl. The old spoon she used to stir-fry fell to the ground. This girl was also Zhou Ran's daughter. Please help me put out the fire. And she was Yunjian's biological sister in her previous life. She was only 2 years younger than Yunjian's body in her previous life. There was a sadness which meant that she was only 1 year younger than Yunjian's sadness that came from the depths of her soul. She was 18 years old. Zhou Ran quickly ran out of the house. Zhou Ran's mother-in-law forced Zhou Ran to have another child when Zhou Ran was heartbroken. Their eyes met. Zhou Ran just one glance and gave birth to stopped in her tracks. When Zhou Ran's mother-in-law saw that Zhou Ran gave birth to another girl, she immediately forced Zhou Ran to have another child. What are you doing? In the end, what are you going to do if your daughter gets taken advantage of if we're late? In the end, she finally gave birth to a boy. I'll help you entertain her. However, when Yunju was 8 years old, the old lady who Zhou Ran called Auntie Wang urged her. Zhou Ran's mother-in-law took one last glance at Yunjian and forced Zhou Ran to divorce Yunjian's father. Yunjian was kidnapped when she was 5 and entered an Hun organization. Yunjian was 19 this year, but she was actually 20. Zhou Ran's mother-in-law she could no longer remember how her parents in her past life who took care of her only then did Yun and I compromise and divorce when she met Zhou Ran's gaze just now. All these years, Yun and I and Zhou Ran never gave up looking for Yunjian and Xiao Yunju. There was no mistaking it. At this moment, Yunmu was being mocked by these boys, and she fought back by scolding and beating them. When Zhou Ran arrived, the boys were about to take turns to slap Yunmu in public. No. Lianyu is outspoken. Don't lower yourself to her level. If you want to hit me. Zhou Ran rushed over. Just as Zhou Ran rushed over, she suddenly felt a figure that was countless times faster than her flash past. In the next second, the figure suddenly appeared in front of the boys. A second before a boy in front of them was about to slap Yunmu, the figure reached out and grabbed the boy's wrist. Then the sound of a wrist bone breaking echoed throughout the room. Crack, crack. Translator, Henyi Translations Editor, Henyi Translations. Chapter 2577. The boy whose wrist was being pinched by Yunjian suddenly let out an earth-shattering howl. Ah! My hand! My... Crack, crack. Accompanying the boy's scream was the sound of his wrist bones being broken one after another. Westgate Market was the most dilapidated market in the slums. Rather than calling it a market, it was more like a large group of old ladies or grandpas setting up mobile stalls to sell vegetables. There wasn't even a place to sell vegetables in the slums. They just spread out a white cloth on the ground and placed all kinds of vegetables on it. It was a simple way to start selling vegetables. Of course, the slums had no shortage of people. There were too many monks and too little gruel. There were many people and very few residences. At most, each family was given one room. Although Westgate Market was dilapidated, it was filled with people. Just now, when Yun Ran was fighting with a few boys, most people stood aside and watched the show. There were also some who tried to stop the fight, but in the end, it was to no avail. Yun Ran had the appearance of a boy since she was young. She was 1.7 meters tall and looked like a man. Although she was only 18 years old, she looked more mature than Yun Jian. From the side, Yun Ran looked like a fresh and handsome young man. Even the girls were elated when they saw her. These boys were from the same school as Yun Ran and had long treated her as a boy. Seeing that Yun Ran had seduced many girls in school, they hated Yun Ran very much. Just now they bumped into Yun Ran, who was buying groceries for her mother. Knowing Yun Ran's family background, these boys began to kick up a fuss. Yun Ran was so angry that she started to fight with 4 or 5 boys. Unfortunately, Yun Ran was a girl. If it was a one-on-one fight, Yun Ran was still very strong. However, when it was 4 or 5 against her, she was naturally weaker. The boys all treated Yun Ran as a boy. Those who lost in a group fight would naturally be beaten up. Just now, when these boys were about to beat Yun Ran, Yun Jian appeared. However, not only did she directly grab the wrist of the first boy who wanted to slap Yun Ran, she also used brute force to break the bones in his wrist. His bones were fractured. Qingzhe. *CK. Who is this girl? Get her. Get her. When a friend of the boy whose wrist had been broken by Yun Jian saw this, he shouted at the boy as if he was completely enraged by Yun Jian's actions. The boys naturally couldn't take this lying down. They joined hands and rushed toward Yun Jian with clenched fists in front of the hundreds of passers-by around the West Gate vegetable market. He actually dared to help Yunin. Her mother was a jinx. She had once lost her daughter, and now her son had been abducted. The boys even chased out of the house by a man. To the ears. You bastard, don't you know this is our territory? And the more gangsters on the streets. Fuzhou was such your grandmother. The reason why these boys were so arrogant was because they had someone backing them. However, when the boys came in front of Yun Jian and waved their fists at her, the surrounding onlookers thought that Yun Jian was in trouble this time. Yunin got up and wanted to help Yun Jian. For some reason, when Zhou Ran saw these people beating up Yun Jian, her heart burned with pain. She wanted to step forward and block the violence of these arrogant boys for Yun Jian. Yun Jian gave a side kick and directly raised her leg high to step on the leading boy. She opened her hands and directly grabbed the sleeves of the 2 boys behind him. With the strength of her hands, she flung the 2 boys more than 10 meters away. The last boy was so scared that he didn't dare to come forward. She just sneered and glanced at the last boy. Then, she bent down and stepped on the palm of the boy who had insulted Yunin and Zhou Ran with her other foot. Kacha kacha. The sound of the knuckles bones breaking clearly reached everyone's ears. Her method just now was straightforward and efficient, causing everyone to panic. Just when the surrounding people who had never seen such a frightening scene before, were about to stop breathing, Yun Jian's cold voice sounded clearly, but it made people tremble with fear. No matter whose territory this used to be, now that I'm here, it's mine.